Welcome to today's artifact, show number 3. I'm Professor Bob, and today we're going to talk about this. This is an artifact from the Cold War. This is a fallout shelter water container. Every fallout shelter in the United States that was designated one by the federal government after reaching certain criteria would receive instruments, food, and these water containers. So I'm going to talk about those today. Now, the fallout shelter stuff, I have quite a bit of it. I believe I have almost everything that was actually in a fallout shelter. And of course, I was born in 1952 under the mushroom cloud, if you will. I was born in January, and in that same month in 1952, the United States detonated its first hydrogen bomb, and the B-52 bomber went into use. And it's still flying. And I'm hoping that I will last at least as long as the bomber does. So far, so good. Now, you see some things around me. In the background, you'll see 2 headgear pieces. One is, this one here, is an East German helmet, the mushroom helmet. And here we have a Soviet officer's dress cap. And of course, then down here, anyone who knows anything about fallout shelters, the sign that told you there was a fallout shelter here. Every school, main buildings had these. Now, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland for 10 years, and you were worried about things happening, particularly when Sputnik went up. But in '62, we moved to southern Missouri, and you would have thought, well, I don't have to worry anymore. No, that's when it got really worse, because that's when you have the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, man, every time the television switched to a special news bulletin, you thought, well, that's it, here it comes. And it was reassuring to know that directly across the street from our house at Reese's Elementary was one of these. Not 40 feet from our front door. So we thought we would be safe. And thank God we didn't have to use them, because what I know now is it would have been horrible, because we didn't really have a great system. And let me give you a couple little background pieces. The government believed that in an all-out attack that we'd have to be sheltered for 14 days. And they would provide enough food and water for 14 days and some equipment to kind of keep track of everything. Now, that might have been true in southern Missouri, but in hot spots, dead center shots to New York, Washington, even Kansas City and St. Louis, I don't think that would have helped. But here is the watering can, 17.5 gallons of water. Now that, you'd have X number of these based on what the government determined was the maximum number of people who could be in that particular shelter. This is the fallout shelter civil defense helmet. It does not have the civil defense marker on it, but it is a civil defense helmet. They used those in World War II. They just used them again. Now, as far as the government is concerned, you just don't give people a water container and put it in a shelter. Now, that requires 8 pages of instructions on how to fill this up, the proper uses of it, and most importantly, how to transition it from being a water container to being a sewerage container. Now, as usual, I will have blow-ups of various things that I'm talking about, so you'll see them. But this particular device, this cover, has all this printing on it. By the way, I got this after Y2K. A lot of people had these for Y2K to bury food and stuff in their backyard, and when that didn't happen, these became open season on the market. I got this off of eBay for about $50, and it cost me $50 to ship it, but it was worth it, okay? It came with a double liner plastic, and what you were supposed to do is put the plastic in, fill it up with water, put the lid on it. As the water goes down, once it's empty, there's a line right here that says sanitary fill line. So what happens at this point is once it's empty, then you put all of the urine and excrement in this. When it's done, you seal it. It has a commode lid that you can put on it, but there's other ways of getting the material in here. then you can store it and dump it after it's all over and done with. So this can become quite messy because full of water, it weighs over 100 pounds. So it's not exactly easy to maneuver. And you can imagine what would happen if somebody knocks over the sanitation container, okay? Now, I thought that, because we expected a surprise attack, right? Well, that would have been a disaster because the instructions suggest that you don't bother filling it up until it appears that something might happen. So if something just surprisingly happens, you go over and there would be nothing in this. You'd be in trouble. Now, there would be food, crackers, and other stuff, but there wouldn't be any water. So that was a little troublesome. Now then, what do you get if you're in a fallout shelter and you get your water ration? Well, you are supposed to get a quart of water a day, 30 ounces. You get 6 ounces 5 times a day. They would give you a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, all basically the same thing, crackers and water. And then you'd have 2 other times where you could then have water. Now sometimes people had U.S. Aqua. There are various tinned versions of this. This is 12 ounces, so you would get 2.5 cans of this for your service. These are all from the era. I've never opened this, but the instructions on it says impervious to nuclear fallout and recommended for convenience and emergency use. It is cheap insurance to have a supply on hand. Great. And so you would have someone who would do that for you. Now I have a whole collection. We taught American history. I love the Cold War. And not a lot of people can say that. But this is the basic course for emergency mass feeding. You took this to learn how to run a fallout shelter. And there's no psychological instruction at all. They just expect everybody to come in, sit down. Oh, yes, okay, well, we'll get our water, and we'll get our food, and we'll be here for 14 days. And there's not a lot of other discussion that goes in and along on that. But these were all over, absolutely all over the United States. What is funny is, these are all provided free by the U.S. government. And in the 70s and 80s, cities around the United States discovered that these things were still sitting in these emergency storage positions. So they began gathering them all up and dumping them. Now, the City of Independence, one of the guys in charge of emergency management, thought it'd be nice to take one of every item they had and make sets so that the high schools around the Kansas City area could have a set of these for instruction in class. And I was one of the people at the top of the list. And then nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened. Then I called and said, what happened? They said, well, bureaucracy. It came free from the government. We can't really legally give it away, so we're going to put it in the landfill. So everything I have came from someone who put it up on eBay and sold it. Now, if you're looking for a place to buy some of this, I haven't been there for many years, but at the Atomic Energy Museum in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you used to be able to buy the Geiger counter and the other stuff, not necessarily the cans of rations, but they used to sell that in the gift shop, which is kind of cool. So you can have that if you wanted to. And as I would mention, during the Cold War, everybody was concerned it's better to be dead than red. There's a commie under every rock. So this is our little artifact for today. Now I would point out to you something else. Some of you I've had a lot of people over the years who, when I taught a class on American history, they would, where'd you get that? So these are all government documents. They're not copyrighted. I'm not going to be making any money off of it. So I have made a CD. It can also be sent on a USB. I have this series of files of items that are just like this. It includes both of these books, the Instructor's Manual from 1966 how to run and feed and stock a shelter, fallout on the farm from the Canadian agriculture, in time of emergency, handbook on nuclear and natural disasters, U.S. government 1968 pamphlet on the specifics of Blair, Nebraska, the SAC command, including maps, shelter, and evacuation, instructions on filling the civil defense water, U.S. government 1962 how to fill the container, plan for the protection for you under fallout, state of New York's 1960 10 survival points for nuclear disaster. And I would point out the New York pamphlet, the government required them to pull it back because it was too graphic on the casualties that would come up. And there's also a PowerPoint that I used on the Cold War period from 46 to 2000. And then there's some MP3 podcasts. One is on fallout shelter food. One is about Eisenhower's secret weapon. And the other one is called The Bombing of Mars Bluff. This is where a nuclear device fell off of a bomber and blew up over a chicken farm in South Carolina. Not the nuclear explosion, but the charge that was to set it free from the plane in case it got locked in place. Now, if you want one of these, if you just email me, I'll tell you how you can pick one up. It's $5, okay? And there's going to be some postage because the post office, even when I put a USB in, they'll go, well, that makes the package too thick. It's going to be like $3.50. So we're probably looking at about $8 if you want something like that. But it is available, or you can go to my website, historyaccordingtobob.com or summahistorica.com, and there's actually a whole series that I did on podcasts on the Cold War period. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Next week we'll look at something else. Thank you very much.